Get it while it's out. We don't get it while it's out. We don't get it while it's out. We don't get it while it's out. Put the pasty paste. We don't get it while it's out. We don't get it while it's good. Blessed be to your day. Spring risings. Grandest risings. Grandest occasion. Sun's out. I'm gonna wear this black shirt and absorb all this energy while it's out, while it's not a cloudy day. Sunday, during Sunday service, we got into the aspects of, what did we get into? What did we get into on Sunday? Yeah, Sunday, we got into some aspects of emotions. Today, we're going to be getting deeper into the aspects of emotions. It's going to sound cliches, but I don't give a fuck. Understand the three things. Healing is a destructive process. You are deserving, but you're not entitled. This level of honesty is comprehending the importance of transparency and the power of your vulnerability. If I asked you, what tone do you operate in, dialogue do you operate in, would you even know what that meant? If I told you, if we look and we understand to something simple, that love is that act, you operate in love, or you either operate in fear. Put those two there. Operate in love or you operate in fear. Depending on which one you operate in is the dialogue that you are going to accept, and then you're going to you're going to categorize your aspects in that category. One of the simplest factors of it is that I've learned as I get deeper and deeper and oh so deeper into my shit is love is only unconditional if I treat my respect, love is only unconditional, an unconditional action based on me understanding that respect is unconditional. Say it one more time. Why are you filling up? Love is unconditional. It's an action, living in the aspects, moving in the aspects of love, moving in that realm of love, moving in the aspects of love, joy, creating your peace, creating your balance. It's unconditional only if I subscribe to respect being unconditional. Until I understood that respect is unconditional, that means no matter who, what, when, where, wherever it's at, respect is unconditional. When I operated in my survival state, when we operate in that survival mode, love becomes transactional because it's mainly lust. It's a price on it. And your respect becomes conditional. Therefore, you'll say things like, I don't listen to those I can't respect. But you listen to everything. You damn near, if you're inside of a space, regardless, you're listening to something. Something, a part of you is listening to something. Either subconsciously, your body language shows you what you're listening to. What you say with your mouth tells you what you're listening to. How your body responds tells you what you're listening to just overall actions inside of that space. So it made me really think about, as I broke it down, respect is an unconditional aspect. Here's why respect, for me, you ain't got to subscribe to it. This is something that I'm living by. I'm learning in the aspects as I'm getting deeper into my shit. Respect is unconditional. I have unconditional respect for everybody because I naturally have unconditional compassion for everybody. I understand that the definition of compassion is the aspects of understanding and accepting people as they are. By having that aspect of unconditional, being in the state of truly being in compassion, not for, because unlike we think about with aspects of caring, you got to care for something, you got to care because of something. Compassion is you're simple in the aspects of your being. When you're sitting in that aspects of your created space of being, peace in that space. Hello, B. So respect naturally becomes unconditional. Until I accepted this and actually worked within that process, I noticed that I always said things, we always say things, the dialogue becomes, there's two different dialogues. There's a dialogue that is directive and based on ultimatums, whether you realize you're making an ultimatum or not. Like, use an example. Directive and ultimatum type dialogue is you're providing commands, you're providing something that sounds condescending, you're providing something that's based upon, it's not based on humility, it's actually based on humiliation. So you're searching for humiliation, you're searching for the pain, you're searching to refabricate that pain, and not understanding how you're refabricating this pain because of emotional hoarding. Now, if you've ever watched any of the hoarding shows on TV, and what we understand about you being on TV, Grand Rising, and we understand about being on TV, by the time it hits the screen, by the time it hits the radio, by the time it hits the screen, the radio, by the time it hits your page, it's already done. It's already done. So if you look at the show Hoarding Alive, Buried, those extreme hoarding shows, and you look at that, that gives you an example of consuming the extreme. See, from the survival, we think about, that's what we got into over these last couple of weeks. We're going to get deep into the survival mindset and the well-being mindset. See, when you're in the survival mindset, you look to consume based on extremes, either on the extreme of too much or the extreme of too little. Either way, in survival, it's going to be based in lack, the lack mentality, self-sabotage, things of that nature. These psychological markers, these psychological points. And we're going to get deep in that as well. When I'm moving inside of my well-being, I noticed that as I'm moving inside of my well-being, that's when I started understanding that I had a deep respect for everybody and where they're at, wherever they're at. I have deep respect for whomever. I had to understand that inside of that respect, being unconditional, that's mainly coming from the aspects of myself. I respect myself deeply. I work on myself deeply. So now it allows me to have different assessments. This is when we get into those key points of that dialogue you having with yourself. For example, I've broken this down before, the videos on my TikTok. When I'm sitting in that space with myself, a lot of the times, my day starts with self-reflection. It might be journaling. I might write something down. In the beginning, it was writing things down. I was heavy inside of my journals, heavy inside of writing petitions, real pencil, real paper, in this sense. Don't say it's an illusion, writing it down. And then I noticed that as I developed inside of my purpose, those same writings that I was writing, journaling out, those are actually the treatments to the content that I create. And this is another thing when we go into the aspects of thinking about when you're creating you're a content creator, you're creating content for your company, your business, things of that nature. One of the things my mentor taught me was you are the content. If you're sitting down, like for example, if I'm sitting down and I'm having a session with a client, I will let my client know, like, hey, I'm going to record our session. They can't hear what you're saying because I have the headphones in, so they can't hear what you're saying, but I'm going to set up my camera over here and I'm going to record us in this session, because later on, I'm going to take this piece of content. If if I took 15 minutes of our session, 20 minutes of our session, 30 minutes of our session, they can't see you on the screen. I'm going to cut this up and I'm going to make this content for me to post out later. It keeps me in a constant, transparent state. It keeps me in a transparent state. When you're operating within your well-being, you remain in a transparent state. When you're in your well-being, you stay within your vulnerable or your open. You stay within your openness. One of the great books that talks about opening, coming into that state of being open, The Way of the Superior Man. Excellent fucking book. It talks about you speaking about being open. And reading a book like that, for me, for an example, it taught me to really look at how I was talking to myself. So now, my self-reflections, before I lay down, after I shut down the day and I'm in my space, now I do a self-inventory. I do a self-inventory every night, self-reflection every morning. So now I do my self-inventory at night. Sometimes I put the camera up and I got the settings so I can show my palm and the camera starts recording me. Or sometimes I might be in the mirror. I'm giving myself these spaces. In order to learn myself more, to stay in this state of intimacy with myself. And here's the key why. A lot of, when we think about the traumatic experiences, the trauma that you went through, the things that you've been through, there's two things that stays constant inside of every traumatic experience. And it's broken down into it's broken down into these three things. There is the psychological imprint. That means the trauma itself, the action, what happened, the actual action. That is the symbol. This is the precursor to the cause. And I'm going to let you know why this is important in a minute. That is the precursor to the cause. There is the cause. The cause is the emotional happening or the emotional aspects or the emotions that are triggered in that moment that what creates the cause. The result is the effect, or the result is the identity, the reaction that happens to that space. So we think about that cause, that's the repetition. The cause is the aspect, that's that space of, this is what we're defining it as. That psychological moment, what we're defining it as, and the repetition of the events that happen after that. Now, if you know anything about, when we understand anything about the aspects of trauma, your mind, naturally in a traumatic state, you're always going to try to rationalize what happened to you. So the event that happened to you when you was 5 years old, you're constantly in the state of emulation. You're going to constantly maintain this dialogue that is directive and based on ultimatums. Let's break down that secret of that science, how it becomes directive. Now you're commanding yourself to forget. The natural aspect of this directive and this ultimatum type dialogue is it's very suppressive. It's suppressive. It's repressive. It uses the trauma as the sign on. The trauma is your co-signer to everything that you're doing inside of that space. Everything that you do is because of the trauma. So you can't evolve past that emotional point. And then when we get deeper, as you sustain this emotional point, that becomes the emotional age. This is why whenever we start going through our healing processes, or when I'm working with my clients, we're going through the healing processes, I have to first acknowledge, I first must use my occult psychoanalysis skills to determine what age this person is at. What's this person's emotional age? One of the biggest things that we got to really understand is understanding this person's emotional age. Because until I understand this person's emotional age, I can't trust what they're saying. And what I mean by I can't trust what they're saying is I have to be able to, when we think about trust, because I respect them for coming up. I respect them for coming into the space. I created this space for them to come to that space. But I also have to we have to create a bond of trust. I have to create a bond of trust with you. That means I must understand that you are within the capacity and you're within the ability in order to understand this process. So think about when you were 5. Think about if you were 5 years old. A 5-year-old going to your job. Think about you being 5 years old, and the day that, I don't know, some people had that daddy go to work with daddy and go to work with your parents. Imagine if you're 5 years old and you're trying to go hold down a job as a 5-year-old. You're trying to hold down a job as a 5-year-old. You're trying to hold down a family as a 5-year-old. You're trying to hold down all of these aspects of adulthood as a 5-year-old. You're naturally going to create the effects of this, because this is when we think about stuck in that traumatic loop. This dialogue, I've talked about this before, is the aspects you stay within a state of hyper-adolescence. Most of the times, because of the traumatic events that have happened to us, that dialogue that we subscribe to becomes directive. It becomes based on ultimatums. Let's use an example of how it becomes an ultimatum. From the most indirect to the most direct ultimatums. You'll tell yourself, if this didn't happen to me when I was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, hell, 10, 20, 21, 30, 31, 40, whatever age it may be, you'll say, if this didn't happen to me when I was younger, I would be like this. You are issuing an ultimatum. You are issuing an ultimatum. Since you are issuing an ultimatum you're issuing an ultimatum to your conscience. Hey, ego, I need you to go find this information based on these ultimatums. Which one's going to wait? And now this is when we come into the aspects of you. I'm trying to find balance. No, you create balance. You have to accept what your ego brings to you. You have to accept what your ego brings to you. That conversation that you haven't had with your mother that keeps coming up, that conversation that keeps coming up with your baby father, those events that happen in your life that keep coming up in your life, you got to accept that conversation because that's what you asked for. See, the thing is, when we go into these spaces based on that afraid of the dark, we're actually afraid of our own shadow. We've repressed it. So if I'm sitting in a repressive aspect and I'm trying to make this command has to be based on shame, guilt, humiliation, pain. It has to bring those up. So anything that's outside of this narrative of pain, it has to be attached to pain. So now you sit here and say, if my life went like this, it would be better. So now you get the example, the stream comes into your life. Now you get this, now you get the person, the place, the thing, the new behavior or the new pattern gets to come into your space, and now it's sitting there in front of you. That new relationship, that new job. But here's the thing. As long as I'm going into things based on something and not nothing, as long as I have the fear of having nothing and I have not embraced nothing, I'm always going to use a shadow aspect. One thing that I teach all of my students, teach all of my clients, teach everybody that ever asks the question is darkness is purity. Darkness is in its purest form at all times. It is pure. It is pure. Darkness cannot be made impure. What you get when you go into the darkness, what you take into that space, that's what creates that shadow. And that's something that's very important to understand when we think about these dialogues. The dialogue of your shadow is always going to be the dialogue based on the first cause that came into that space with you. So you going through your life and you're wondering why you're wondering why you had access to certain spaces. It's because your trauma had to take front row. Your trauma took front row. So everything you did was everything that you developed based on that pain, that shame, that guilt, that humiliation, that aspect, this unresolved aspect of yourself that you kept taking into that space. That's what's activated. That's what's giving you access to that space. That's why whenever you're in that space and now you're starting to feel happy, you're starting to feel good, you're starting to feel things, and now your feelings are coming online, and now you're dropping from the aspects of the thought process, the imprint, the childlike imprint into the body. So every time you're dropping new information into the body for your body to read. Now you start feeling disdain. You start feeling the shame. You start feeling the guilt. You start feeling, oh my God, I'm not used to feeling this way. You have one of two ways to operate inside of that space. And that's the aspect when we talk about acknowledging that cycle. See, until I acknowledge those cycles based on, I have the ultimate respect for everybody in any space. My respect is unconditional. I can accept you for as you are, and what you do. And at any given time, I can now learn, since I'm embracing unconditional, i.e. the nothing, that means no expectation of this individual, person, place, thing, whatever it may be, behavior or pattern, I can accept it as I can fully absorb it. Think about it like this. Things that aren't natural to you, your body can't fully absorb. Your body won't naturally absorb. Your body has telltale signs. Your body has telltale signs that'll tell you like, yep, that ain't supposed to be going in us. That's not supposed to go in us. That's not supposed to happen. That's not supposed to be there. But we take it as, I guess that's pain is necessary. We're stuck in this humiliation, this what I'm gonna call the humiliation model. So you'll sit there and you'll this is when we come into the state, so you'll start over consuming. And since I'm over consuming and my body only can take so much, your body's only elated to take so much based on your emotion, based on if you understand your budget, your emotional budget, then now you find yourself overly consuming. You find yourself in this state because now you have to acknowledge the cycle. Wait, I'm over explaining myself. I'm over projecting myself. I'm over protecting a situation. This situation that I'm over protecting, like for an example, if I hear, like I remember that one of my aspects of my younger traumas was, I remember my youngest sister, which is 22 now. I remember when she was 16, 17, and she was telling me the things that were going on inside of the house. I had to pause myself. I literally had to pause myself because, of course, the first defense of me being in the aspects of myself, being in my manhood role, I gotta protect the serve. But I had to really think, what relationship was I acting from? What relationship was I acting from? What relationship was I reacting to? Was it a relationship in my present, or was it a relationship based on my past? Was it a relationship that I developed out of guilt, or is it a relationship that I built out of actual growth? Is the conversation that me and my sister are having, my little sister are having, is it based on she's giving me ultimatums? It's a unconscious ultimatum. That means she's going based on right or wrong, or is she really giving me the open space to be able to? Is she really expressing her emotions? Maybe she doesn't need me to necessarily show up and show out. Maybe she doesn't need that. Maybe what she actually needs is for me to show up and just simply be available. Maybe she needs me to take her from that space for a couple of hours or for a couple of days. Maybe she needs that, rather than me going in and adding my own insecurities, my own reactions based on my childhood in that same environment. See, this is when you start changing your dialogue. Because when you're stuck in that dialogue of ultimatums, you're looking at everything to be either right or wrong. But I noticed as I started getting more into, when we think about actually applying mechanics, when I got into the cult aspect and I was understanding the positive and the negatives, and understanding that there was negative instances in my life that served the purpose at that point in time. But to keep reacting or keep using these same negative instances that were that would be a negative instance inside of my life would be detrimental to me today. I understood that there's positive aspects that worked inside of my day and my life, that if I keep responding through these positive narratives, they're detrimental to my today. So then that helped me understand the aspect of my dialogue has to be constructive. Is my dialogue constructive? Or am I stuck in a state of being counterproductive? That means every time that I go through something based on an ultimatum, you notice with an ultimatum, no matter what the ultimatum is, you never win. You never win. No matter what the ultimatum may be, you never win. No matter what ultimatum, whatever side you choose, it ultimately leads to a lesser sense of events. A lesser sense of events got to come in play for it to even work. When you're choosing ultimatum or that directive aspect, that means the direct, and then this when we go into the aspects of our conversations with people. All of the stuff I just said was the conversation with yourself. All of the stuff we just went through just now, the conversation with yourself. Remember, as I said in the opening, if you're just coming in that other aspect with yourself, by the time it hits the screen, that means by the time it reflects, by the time you project it out and it comes back and it resituates itself and it reformulates itself, it's already happened. It's already happened. But if I'm stuck inside of that space based on the dialogue that is restrictive and suppressive, that's when I'm in reaction. That's when it's an afterthought. That's when you have that argument with somebody, and we've had those arguments with motherfuckers. You have an argument with somebody, and then at the end of the argument or 3 days later, you thought about 16 different things that you could have said during that argument. Damn, I should have said this, and I could have said this. I could have said this about his mama. I could have said this about her daddy. I could have said this, this, and this. And you go down this long list of events. But pause for a second. Why are you still operating in that space? Why are you still operating there? That is a good moment for you to actually realize, like, wait, I'm still operating in that energy. I have not resolved that energy. Why is it hard for me to why I haven't resolved this spike in my energy. I haven't resolved this. On the surface, you look at that and you bring that to resolve, you bring that to a realization. But you're resolving to dissolve the outermost aspects of that situation. Most of the times when we're stuck within these cycles of trying to find love instead of creating it with ourselves, trying to find peace instead of creating it with ourselves, sitting inside of these emotional points, understanding things like an emotional authority. That's what we getting into. That's what we getting into in class at 3. If you aren't in the class, then you wouldn't know. But in the aspects of the class, then we have to ask ourselves questions. Do I have information in my present state that matches what I'm bringing in? Or am I using information that I've used? Am I using information that corresponds to things that I put into my aspects of my past? The only way to be able to decipher that is by sitting in that space. If I'm not actively sitting, I'm going to be very, very passive. I can't be assertive. There's the four language styles. There's assertive, passive aggressive, and avoidant. When you come into the fullness of yourself with your purpose, and we're going to build into that, coming into your purpose, you become assertive. There's a difference between assertive and aggression. Remember, you're going from assertive, passive aggressive. Aggressive almost has no resolution. You can't resolve anything through an aggressive state. I don't care what you do. If you put a pot of water on the stove and the water is boiling, I don't care what you do. You cannot see the bottom of that pot clearly. So the aggressive aspect, this is when you start understanding and listening to, like, if you're inside of spaces that are based on the correspondence to your trauma, that psychological point, was it based on aggression? That psychological point that set the causes, that set the effects, was it based in a state of aggression? Was it based in a state of aggression? That means that traumatic experience, from everything from sexual trauma to the first time that your mother said no to you because you wanted a cookie or some shit, or you wanted to do something and she said no to you, or your dad said one thing and then at the last minute he couldn't do it. Was it based in aggression? Was it based in him being passive aggressive about a situation? Was it based in him being passive about a situation? Because I can almost guarantee it was never based from a state of being assertive. Because if it was from a state of being assertive, you wouldn't have to deal with it. This is what we have to be honest with in that aspect. A lot of the things that we come into based on that old aspect of ourselves, in the aspects of when we talk about being in that the lower state of self, a lot of that shit is based in aggression and being passive. A lot of the things that we define based on that survival narrative was based on being passive and aggressive. From that passive and or aggressive state, then we developed in the survival narrative, we developed the tones that gave the directive / ultimatums to the dialogue in which we used inside of one of those spaces. You ever had a conversation with somebody and they wouldn't say anything? They would, like, you see, in your mind, they're not responding back to you. They're not yelling back at you. They're not saying some shit back to you. They're not coming back at you the way you go into them. But every time that you sit there and you're like, see, you're not listening to me, they're able to tell you line by line what you said. They're able to tell you line by line what you said. I am listening to you. This is what you said, and this is what you said. This is what you said. This is what you said. They give you the floor, but you're not used to that because you're used to combating with someone, being combative, because that's the only way you seem to ever got your point across. Because because in your mind, you got this reflective psychological point in your shadow that because your mom didn't fight hard enough, or your dad didn't fight hard enough, or no one was there for you, you thought you thought the other extreme was to be ultra aggressive. So now you develop being ultra aggressive. So now every time you have a conversation with people, if somebody says, whoa, and they actually express their feelings to you, now inside of your mind, you're triggered to say, but you're a man. Toughen up. You're a man, toughen up. This is just the way that I talk. But if I sit here and I realize most of the way that I talk was based on trauma, and I developed a whole entire dialogue based on trauma, and then I go grab me some candles, and start wanting to go do some ritual work, and I'm using that same tone in order to get things, and it works once, might work twice, might work a couple times. But I noticed that every time that it does work, I have to have the law of, and I now understand the law of equivalent exchange. That means it got to be even energetics. That means my access into that space when I was angry and I went and did that. And if I went and did a prosperity ritual, a money ritual, and I did it while I was angry, that's why your grandmother told you, don't do shit, don't say shit when you're angry, don't do shit when you're upset. Don't do shit inside of your emotions. Because now I've set the tone for I got to remain inside of that dialogue. So of course, now when I'm sitting in that space, I do this prosperity ritual. And now I'm getting the bag comes in. My job goes up in hours, whatever, however it comes to me in that space, not just in money. Information comes to me in that space. Everything's going to come to me aggressively. Everything's going to come to me aggressively. Everything that I want is going to come to me aggressively. Everything that I need is going to come to me in a state of being assertive. As long as I'm still inside of that aggressive state, I'm out. Being in an aggressive, domineering state, I'm always going to be in a state of avoidance. I'm avoiding myself. So there's always going to be a for, a because, woulda, if this happened, well, if you did this and if you did that, I'm always going to spit out directives. You should have did it this way. You should have did it this way. We should have went this way. We should have went left instead of going right. All I'm giving out is directives. All I'm doing is giving out directives and feeding ultimatums instead of sitting in that space and learning how to have a conversation with myself. There's a difference between me telling some chick like, yo, bitch, make me a sandwich, and then me being aggressive and like, hey, make me a sandwich. And then me being assertive in saying, hey, I'm working with a client right now. I'm working with some clients. I've been working with clients all day, and my energy, I can feel my energy going down. I can feel my energy dissipating, and I need to get my energy up. And I know that I know that you cooking or crafting or making something, that's your way of you showing me love. That's your way of showing me that you're responding to me and nurturing me. Can you whip me something up if you're not busy? If not, I'll push through this. What I'm doing, that's not an ultimatum. I'm creating a space. I'm expressing my emotions. I'm expressing my feelings. I'm creating a space that is now open and now can be evenly distributed into in the state of being equivalent to what I'm actually in that space. I was being assertive. I was leaving that space. That space is now open. The conversation is different. As opposed to you falling down into that shit, unless you had these conversations before. Hey, bitch, make me a sandwich. And now she looking at me like I've lost my damn mind for asking her to make me a damn sandwich. And then now it's a whole entirely different dialogue that's based on humiliate. Now it's a humiliating, shame, doubt. You can't talk to me this way, da 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 da. Now, here's the key. In that space that I opened up that was open energetically in aspects of expressing feeling and expressing emotional need, I expressed emotional need, presence. We are present in that moment. We are present now in that moment. If I'm using the directive or the ultimatum type dialogue, it's always going to be pulling from the past or the future. The past or the future. So now let's say, okay, she makes me a fucking sandwich. She has resentment inside of her. She's feeling some type of doubt inside of her in her mindset. I can't believe he talked to me that way. I should have spoke up. I should have spoke for myself. All of that energy is being crafted through her head, out of her mind, through her mouth, through her hands, into my fucking sandwich. That's being crafted into my fucking sandwich, into that food, into that cup of water, into the bottle of water that she brings me or whatever, into that space, whatever they're bringing you. Now all of that's in that space. And now you sit there and partake of it. You sit there and partake of it. Now you're wondering why later on in a future tense, this unresolved portion that you created, because as it swings back, now she asks you for something. Instead of her using aggression, she uses a passive-aggressive tone. Or he uses a passive-aggressive tone. These can be interswitched. Uses a passive-aggressive tone. So now you're sitting there with this passive-aggressive tone on the table, and now you're getting a passive-aggressive directive, and now you're wondering, now inside of this space, you always have a chance and a choice. You're going to be like, what's wrong? What's wrong with you? Now, if this person that you know is inside of that space and they're not used to, that's what they're used to, they're only going to react. You only can react from your trauma if it's unresolved when you're triggered. You only can either act from your unresolved or you sit there and assess it, or you take that time to assess it. So now you sitting there, now you're wondering a future tense of time where she or he used to be at the house, be around you all the time, used to be there for you all the time, and now you're wondering why that shit has dissipated drastically. Now instead of them being there while you were creating and you want to share your excitement, now you're looking at them and you're wondering why their eyes aren't glowing the way they used to glow. They're not as excited. They're not giving you the positive reinforcement that you used to get, that you were getting in the beginning. Because you have to understand, in order for that to continue the way that you started that dialogue with that in that space, it has to continue. So this is when we get real deep and we think about battered women. We think about even men getting beat on, getting hit on, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, physical abuse. We think about all these abusive tones. Then we get higher up. We think about spiritual attacks and things of that nature. And we wondering why these things keep happening so prevalently to you. Is because you are hoarding information. Your body is now hoarding this information as a way to block. And your mind is telling you it's protecting you to block the access of accessing that information. Now you can't access that information. Man, nothing's really wrong. Nothing's wrong. Everything's okay. Your emotional intelligence is out of whack. I remember my emotional intelligence was low as shit. So I'm sitting in the space, all right, you're okay, cool. Even in the aspects of how you ask for information. See, this is when you have to understand the conversation with yourself. Even when you ask for information, if shorty's used to saying, I'm fine, I'm okay, I'm good. Even in that sense, there's a way that you go about opening up that dialogue. Your dialogue must be in the aspects of expressing feeling. You must be able to acknowledge things about this person. But equally inside of that space, you must allow this person inside of that space to equally bring their things to the surface. Because if you ever notice when this ultimatum dialogue or this directive dialogue, nobody ever apologizes. Nobody apologizes in this ultimatum type dialogue. If I use a directive tone, that means I use a commanding tone, a condescending tone. Then every time that it comes time for me to apologize, I use an ultimatum. If I'm using an ultimatum in the beginning of using that ultimatum in that same dialogue, then when I go into an apology, I use a directive. Use an example. If I'm sitting inside of a space and I say something to someone, let's use the example. If you want to go here, like I'm not listening to the space, I'm not reading the space, I'm not looking at body language, and I'm sitting inside of that space and I use a directive. A command. I use something that seems condescending inside of that space. Then every time, whenever it peaks out, the emotions peak, they get upset, they shut down, they get upset, they shut down, they want to punch me in my face, they want to cut me, they want to go bleach some shit. If I use an ultimatum inside of that space, it's always going to be an ultimatum because it has to match, it has to be in sync with that. But there is the way of shifting the dialogue from the ultimatum to the true aspects of the apology. To apologize, to acknowledge, to accept. In order to apologize, I must first acknowledge and I must accept. Not based on this biased tone with somebody, but actually accepting it with myself. Accepting how I made them feel. Accepting how they are saying I made them feel. Or the energy that I demonstrated made them feel. They felt some type of way. I must accept that as it is. Don't try to change it. Don't try to manipulate it. And then I must acknowledge, if I have to take time, that means if I don't understand, I must acknowledge I need more clarity. See, being an aspect of being a divine masculine, I talked about this on Sunday. Even though I got married to myself August 16th, 2021, that was just the initiation of that process of me coming into my divine masculine presence. So I still had a lot to learn. This is another thing that we get into aspects when we think about the hoarding mentality. When you think about being a hoarder, when you're sitting there, you're emotionally hoarding, everything that you grab, what we talked about Sunday, everything you grab is based on fucking status. If I grabbed and said, ooh, I'm married to myself, and it was based on status, I can guarantee any bitterness, resentment, any residual bitterness, resentment, shit that's still playing in the background will be the shit that I'm going to use inside of that space in some way, shape, or form. Either energetically, vocally, energetically in what I say, energetically in what I present, energetically in how it's going to come up. It's going to come up. I'm going to respond to something a certain way. I'm going to look at things a certain way because I'm looking at it through that bias. I got married to myself because all these bitches are unloyal. That's the most horrible reason. That's the most horrible reason to get fucking married to yourself. Because you're not getting married to yourself in this state. You're not getting married to yourself to say because I've been this way for years. Because now all you're doing is introducing the directive in the ultimatum to your becoming inside of that space in the information that you are going to filter in. Now all of your dialogues that you having with now you meet this dude, you meet this chick, you meet these people, motherfuckers is crazy about polygamy, and it's crazy to me because I'm like, nigga, do you have a business? Do you have a company? Do you have a successful business or a company? Do you have the ability? And when I talk about going into the aspects of polygamy, do you have a successful company or business or platform or blueprint in which you have acquired resources that you can actually do that into that space? Remember, this shit is energetic. You would say, well, I know I like women and I know I got, it can't be in your lower, it can't be in survival mode. The main thing about a lot of the things that we've seen in the aspects of people doing their work, people doing spiritual work and people becoming healers and all of these things is the fact that you've been doing it through a survival mode narrative. You've been doing it through that survival mode narrative. So if I'm doing everything through the survival mode narrative, everything's going to have a bias to it. This is where you get into the aspects of there's a difference between if I sit inside of the space with myself now, and I'll say over the last 10 months, I wrote a petition in month 3, and I've been acting out that before I wrote down the new petition. They do. In the aspect, I wrote down this petition because I had to look at my first set of intentions. My first ever set of intentions was I had to take it from a business. My first set of intentions was stepping out of what I call the 9 to 5 mentality into the LLC mentality or the corporate mentality, or we would call it I'm the bad boy at school to being the bad boy prep kid. And if you like, when I reopen up the store, because I just got all the orders done, so I'm gonna reopen up the store in the next couple of days. Everything that you're doing inside of that space is gonna now be different when we're talking about well-being. Well-being is based on short-term longevity. Survival is only based on short-term. It's based on instantaneous. You don't even get in the short-term when you're in survival mode. Everything's based on being instantaneous. If I get it, ooh, yay! You're living out ultimatums. If this happens, then I'll do this. You'll do it for a couple of days. You'll do it for a couple of weeks. You'll do it for a couple of weeks. You'll fast for a couple of weeks. You'll detox for a couple of weeks. You won't have that conversation with those people for a couple of weeks, but you don't have an actual reason for why you're doing it. You have a directive for why you're doing it. I'm tired of getting humiliated. I'm tired of getting hurt. I'm tired of this happening. Every time I go over there, I'm tired of them not understanding me. They don't know you. They don't know you. One of the biggest things one of my mentors has taught me was when you're inside of your space living your shit, you got to act like nobody knows you. When I sat with that multiple times, it opened up the whole different aspect of how I even present myself. Because I'm not presenting, because I have a habit, because of my south node. This is when we start using when you actually start applying information, my south node is in Sagittarius. My north node's in Gemini, my south node's in Sagittarius. And I know being in that Sagittarius north node, you get stuck in old convictions. You get stuck in an old conviction rate. As opposed to me shifting into my Gemini aspect and being able to separate and actually create balance. So you got to know when you're going through and you're understanding, when you're grabbing this information, how are you using it? How are you applying it? This is when we start, then you skip into the aspects, we're going to skip ahead and we'll come back. You know how I do it. When you're working inside of your purpose, everything you do aligns with your purpose, because your purpose is based on processing. Your purpose is based on processing, well-being. Everything is to maintain your well-being. When you're in that survival mode and you're trying to do everything, this is when you got 16 motherfuckers out here you got 16 people want to go read fucking tarot cards. And then, I want to do energy healing. But if you come to me after you went to somebody else for energy healing, one, I have one rule. I do not discuss other practitioners, no matter who they are. We do not discuss their works and what you did. Guess what? You chose them. If they got you for $2,000, they got you for $2,000. They got you for $2,000. They got you for $2,000. You can't come in here and hit me, because that's the same. Because we're going to go back when I get back to this. I'm making this point. Then we're going to go back to that. In that space with yourself, guess what you did? You chose them. You energetically chose them because they said they can do energy work. So now you're sitting there, and then they wave their hands either in person or over you, and they unlock your root chakra. So they swirling around and unlocking your chakra systems. And now you feel all this energy coming up, but you got to remember that energy been backed up ever since you was 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, ever since you, let's say 12. That energy was backed up ever since you were 12 years old. It absorbed every experience haphazardly since you were 12 years old. And now you 25, 33, whatever age you're at. The first thing I ask you is, so did you guys sit down and talk about the things that came up? What do you mean? So if my root chakras are coded, the grounding, my basics, my roots, the aspects of how that building block, the foundations. After he or she unlocked your root chakra, did you guys go through exercises or processes to process that information? Or did he just say, okay, it's unlocked, here, put this stone, here, wear this stone for a couple of weeks, and then it's going to absorb everything, but now 4 weeks later, you realizing why you got to keep going back? One thing about your purpose inside of your well-being versus your survival. Survival is based on status. Survival is based on constantly repeating things and staying within a state of complacency. So every time that shit comes up, I need to go get my energy recentered. You do realize that the people that you're going to, based on that recentering process, that's what they feed off of. As opposed to you going to an individual, and this is based on you doing the research, learning shit, and then you sit inside of that space, and then you meet somebody like me, like, hi. Before we do any type of energy work, I require a consultation. Primarily because in my purpose, in my energy being protected is number one, I need to have a consultation with you. I need to know exactly where you're at. Just like I said in the beginning, I must know that you have the capacity and the ability, always, the capacity and the ability to understand and comprehend what we're about to do. Comprehension and ability to understand what we're about to do, what we're about to undergo. Do you understand that us doing this energy work and us unlocking these chakra points, you can say my heart is very heavy. No matter, you say your heart, your crown, your throat chakra's blocked, no matter what you say to me, we're starting at your root chakra. Why we got to start at my root chakra? Why would I start at the top of the building when the bottom of the building is the shit that we got to deal with? It don't matter what I do to your heart space, because I can unlock your heart space. I can unlock it. Yay! You walk around here looking like Iron Man when he first when he first put the new shit in his chest. But then you're going to be just like Iron Man and Iron Man 2 when that nigga kept putting the new plating, when that nigga had to keep putting them new cells in that shit, that nigga kept burning out. You're going to keep burning out until we get into that root. Now, why is this important? Because as you're evolving, you're going to naturally want things are naturally going to dissipate. That means, I'm going to give the example, and it's going to make people like, oh my God, I hate when that happens. The same way that you felt about your baby father, your baby mother, your mom, your dad, these unresolved aspects in your life, you're still hoarding those unresolved emotions and suppressed emotions. Carrying that something into the nothingness that's what you're going to naturally attract inside of that space. So now you went from a bunch of girls that was hot girl summering, a bunch of dudes that was out there, and you went from the car club niggas and the biker boys and the car club groupies chicks and the chicks that was in that narrative, and then you just transferred all of that into your spiritual, into your consciousness. So now instead of niggas being car boys and car clubs, you done joined up in other clubs. Now the same clubs, these slots are now empty. You're looking for something to refill those slots. When we think about hoarding, you won't if you get rid of something, you're going to replace it with something because you stuck into something. But if you go in there based on that nothing, it changes everything. Now you ain't sitting there because you didn't went through 75 different types of groups and fraternities and organizations. Maybe you needed it. You needed it. That's why you went through it. And let's just put that there. But what did you receive what did you become while you was in those spaces? Not what did you acquire. Again, survival is acquiring shit. Survival mode is acquiring things. You ever had a conversation with somebody, and every time you have a conversation with them, they're talking about the newest thing that they got? I just got the new 100, I just got the new 75-inch curved TV. I just got this, I just got that, and just got that. But then you ever had it, then as you leveled, then you started working with it, and then every time you talking to somebody, the conversation changed. They were like, I just finished reading this, or I just finished studying this. These are 95% of the conversations people have with me. Someone asks me, what have I been up to? What have I been doing? The first thing that I lead with is like, I feel great. I feel great. I'm leading with myself first. This is what you understand. I'm leading with myself first. And then I'm going to build on, based on assessing, based on discernment, their capacity and their ability to my discernment of what they're talking about. If somebody's talking about a bunch of material things that they received, and I'm talking about, nigga, I just went camping and had a whole bunch of different experiences. I had a whole fucking experience of downloads and everything, but they talking about material shit, or their responses are like, you went camping? How much the tent? Like, you got a tent? How much the tent cost? And they're costing all my shit out. I understand that they do not, I can trust them to a level of that capacity and ability. They only have the ability to make decisions based on transaction. That doesn't make them any less bad of a person, good of a person. All they talk about is this. They never want to talk about anything. Instead of me going in this big ass fucking rant, which I went in those rants, or else I couldn't understand it. But now I understand the definition of that conversation. I still respect them, still got love for them. But where I'm at in the level, now I'm looking at the level of access and this is when we're gonna get deep into that, the level of access now changes. Now they don't have access to me like all the time. We're not having the same conversations. This gets even deeper when you're thinking about when you're letting shit go, when you're actually letting things go. You got to remember, everything gets the same boundary. Everything gets the same initial boundary. It doesn't matter. Like I always talk about this aspect. My mom is going through her healing process ever since January, but my mom gets the same level of access to me when it comes into that space. When we're talking about the healing space, when we're talking about doing the work, she gets the same level of access to me as any other client. She doesn't get special attention just because she's my mother, other than she's there. So of course, when I see her, other than that, she doesn't get any special attention. That means I'm not going to take out parts of the exercise, take out parts of the steps. I might adjust them because I adjust them to each client, but I'm not going to take something out. The hardest thing it comes in to do when you're building that boundary and you're stop hoarding and changing that dialogue is realizing that everybody got to go through that same root analysis. I can almost guarantee, I was on my run earlier. I was on my run this AM, and I was sitting there, I was like, yo, I can guarantee that if you do a true root analysis of your space, your circle, everybody in your space, everybody that's around you, everything that's happening in that space, take an honest assessment, I can guarantee by the time let's say you line it up in these five certain points in your root analysis, everybody's root analysis is different. I can guarantee by the time you get to point 5, which is your 5th important thing for yourself, I can guarantee you're going to have somebody in your space where you're going to sit there and you're going to feel some type of way about thinking about it. I don't want to think that way about them. Here comes the truth to it. You're realizing that, I've given this person excuses. I have omitted them from this part of my process. And in me omitting them from this part of my process of processing and learning, they get a pass. And then so when I'm wondering why shit's going on in my life, I'm not thinking about like, I'm doing everything. I'm protecting myself. I'm doing all my shit. I'm doing all my works. My altar sits beside my bed. I got my other altar in front of me, family altars, got that shit. But like, why is it still going on? And you think about, now I meditated, now I'm scanning my aura, and I'm wondering where this hole coming from, and if I'm doing everything right. Spirit had that motherfucker text you right there. Spirit had that motherfucker text you, call you. Spirit had that motherfucker come up on your timeline complaining about something. Spirit had that shit come up right there at the point in time of what you need necessarily until you deal with it. The subtleties. When you're stuck in survival mode, you're looking for something dramatic to happen. You're looking for something high conflict to happen. You're looking for fire to fall and shit. Shit be subtle. The moment that you sit there and say, ooh, I'm going to start working out. That means I got to wake up early. Every morning that you decided to wake up early in that first week, I can guarantee the same person that has been a distraction that at a point in time in your past served a purpose, even though it may have been in a negative sense. Y'all were wilding out, joking and shit. They served a purpose. Now they don't serve a purpose. Now you're seeing them as a distraction. You're seeing them for who they really are. It's your emotions that you project that make it bad or good. I hate doing this to people. Maybe I can do this. It's your emotions that put you in that space where you're sitting there trying, maybe I can like tell them this or I can nudge them this way. You got to really assess, do they have the capacity and the ability? So in the aspects of emotional hoarder, an emotional hoarder is stuck within survival mode. They have no authority over their own space. So they're required in the aspects of going in the detriment of that dialogue. You give out, you're taking authority is based on status and title. Where you gave people authority, they should have just had responsibilities. You gave that motherfucker the authority to blow your back out. So that, oh, that's my man. Or you were blowing, this chick can take your soul out your body and rinse it and give you back a dirty ass soul out of dirty mop water. And you gave that bitch the authority over your life. over that aspect of your life, they should have just had a responsibility. They should have just had a responsibility. This is where you get into the aspect of you thinking about your. I saw a post the other day, it keeps repeating, and was like, I wish we could choose our baby fathers. I wish we could choose our baby mothers. What? This is when you start looking at things like, and now because think about that aspect, the same aspect of your rude boy baby father, your rude boy, your rude gal baby mother in that space. She was aggressive and she was a hustler, but you're not hustling anymore. You're in alignment with your shit. You're actually understanding that the healing is the destructive process, and you're doing that work. You're doing that work. You're understanding that in order to have transparency, shit naturally got to fall away. So my vulnerability, or me owning my vulnerability, my strength and my vulnerability, that's what's going to bring things into alignment. I'm no longer hustling. I'm no longer trying to maintain or actually sustain things and keep things coming back in my life. I'm no longer sitting inside of a space with myself where if I lose it, I'm going to get it right back. If I lost something based on insecurity, then I'm going to gain it back based on insecurity. I'm just going to amp up to insecurity. Now my mindset is I'm in alignment. What falls away, what is meant to be within inside of my space will be, and whatever falls away will come back in tenfold in a healed state, in its actual healed form, because I am in gratitude. So it will come in a great state of gratitude, because I talked about this on Saturday. I talked about this on Sunday with the aspects of everybody want to do their full moon stuff. The intentions that you playing with, the affirmations that you're using right now, did you set on the first ones that you used? The first intentions and the first setting of the first intentions that you had 30 days ago, last new moon, last full moon. Are you living in the disciplines of those intentions? If not, it's okay. Take those intentions, take the intentions that you know you didn't work on in the last 30 days and apply them to these new ones. That way you actually can apply in real time actual affirmation. You can apply affirmations to the present and not based on your past. Flip it again. The affirmations that you spoke in the last time, have you applied those into the mechanics of checking the dialogue with yourself of using those affirmations and taking away the I am doing this for into becoming I am in gratitude. You go from I am in the abundance for this to you shift to I'm in abundance to I am abundance. So you got to be able, you're shifting that process. See, a lot of times when we're stuck in that survival state, you're going to be abundant until something happens that you don't like. And then you're like, oh my God, I feel my worth is being challenged and I feel like I'm being drained. Ah. But if I'm always abundant, I'm accepting everything that I'm abundant in. If I'm abundant and I know that I have a lack of accountability issues when it comes to family members, and I always say that I'm abundant, that means I'm an abundant and a lack of accountability. So now everybody that comes to me asking me for money and asking me for shit, I only have myself to hold accountable first to why they're inside of my space. Why am I innate? And I talked about this on Sunday, when we talk about the aspects of staying in a fixed position. In all of these people's lives, I was in a fixed position. I was the one with the money. I was the one with the money. I was the one with this. I was the one with all these things. And I was always available. My availability was based on that. But now that I'm no longer in that fixed state of mind and self, now when these people come to me with their if they come to me, the conversation is different. Instead of me saying, hey, I'm going to give you $200, I'm going to give you this money right here. Instead of me saying that, or, hey, I'm going to give them this or whatever. Instead of me saying that, I'm like, hey, when's the last time you sat down with yourself and really had a conversation about your budget? Now I'm being assertive in that way. Because now I'm just showing up differently. The last conversation I had with my little sister, in the aspect of her thinking, like the things with her and her side, inside of her space, The conversation that I had with her was similar to the conversation that I had with one of my homeboys 7 years ago. One of my, I consider him still my brother, 7, 8 years ago, was going through a whole moment. Everybody was dumping on this nigga. It ain't your fault. It ain't on you. I was the only one that in real time, for the first time, using that instinct of, nah, nigga, I'm going to say the opposite. This is the opposite day. I'm going to say the opposite shit. And I said the opposite shit to this man. I said, yo, you going to go through some of the realest shit in your shit. Da-da-da-da-da. That happened 7 years ago. I remember 2000. That was like 2014, 15. He was going through that cycle of shit, 16. After that cycle happened, I went through like being homeless and all of my shit. I've told these stories and aspects of my lectures. After that shit happened, I look at him now, like, and now he's the position, the space that he's in. He has a new job. He's managing at a new spot at a restaurant. He's has his place. His shit is in order. He's in more order with himself. We click back up, even though we're not having conversations like that. We're not having conversations. He follows me on TikTok. He actually created a TikTok just to follow me on TikTok and follow my information. So I know that in respect, unconditional respect, we started with unconditional respect. He's accepted me, I accept him. He knows that the shit that he does inside of his space is for him. He knows the shit that I do in my space is for me. If where it connects, it connects. Where it doesn't. That's one of the biggest things, because I remember going through a whole process, and I think we're gonna get into this on Friday, because people, like, one of the biggest things people get confused with when it comes to family is, like, I remember I told people, I was like, yo, I took 5 years away from my family. I took 5 years away from everybody. I wasn't talking to not one family member. And I sat with that, and I allowed myself to go through those processes of not talking to my family and really understanding the fixed points of why I was there. A lot of the shit was still based on the generational trauma, but understanding the root of that generational trauma was rooted in the aspects of my status. So I was the good son when I did something that was perceived good, that was of an accessory to something for them, but I was the bad son when I wasn't. I was the bad nephew. I was the bad brother. I was all these things, went down that whole fucking line, but I honestly sat with, oh, this is why. And it wasn't from that bitter narrative of, see, people only want you and want you around them whenever you doing stuff for them, but the moment that you stop doing stuff for them, nigga, that's surface. That's surface level shit. Of course, yay. You acknowledge the surface. Get deeper. Let's get deeper into it. What's behind your because of? On the other end of that, what's behind the because? People only want you for money. What's before that for? What is your definition of money? What's your emotional definition of money? How did you make your first $100? I've admitted this. I got my first $100 off somebody being addicted to some shit. Addicted to sugar. That shit grew to motherfuckers addicted to weed. That addiction, but that addiction had a root to it. That addiction was the root of motherfuckers trying to escape themselves. That was the ultimate root to the reason why I was able to acquire what I acquired. And as long as motherfuckers were addicted to shit, I could sell it. I could money mitch that shit. I could sell it. I could move it. I could make that shit dance. But the moment I started stepping out of that space, and that was back in like 2003, that was like 2005 and 6. When I stepped out of that space, I was like, damn, a lot of this shit's hard. Damn, I realized that I never worked for anybody, but the initial reason why the same reason I don't work for nobody now is the same reason I didn't work for nobody then. I didn't want to sit with that reason. See, the reason I was working for everybody and working jobs and doing all of these odd jobs and things in that space was based on my trauma was leading me. This is when you get honest. My trauma was leading me. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to stay safe and neutral. I was confusing peace for neutrality. So now I'm inside of this new space and I'm building and I'm creating inside of this space. This is me creating my peace. Creating my peace is different than avoiding things based on neutrality. Neutrality, as we've been going into this, is based on your neutrality is based on ultimatums. If in every space around you, everybody around you depends on what you say. And you have a website, or you have a blog, or you have information, or you created a space for them to go to have that conversation. But they're trying to get the undercut. They're trying to like, okay, I know you do that over there, but I need you to talk to me over here. These shits aren't separate. These shits aren't separate. See, when you come into that divine sense of wholeness with yourself, and you understand your dialogue is based on expansion and growth, and it may sound a little bit harsh to somebody, but that's on their ears, even though you said it in the best way possible for you. That's all that really matters. And then you sitting inside of that space and having that conversation, but they're not willing to do the work. You got to ask yourself the real reason why they're not willing to do the work. It's easy for me to say when they don't have the money, of course they're going to come to me. As soon as they get the money, they don't talk to me. But it's even realer for me to sit with myself and say, wait, the reason why they don't have to ever get the money, take responsibility, take accountability, because I'm always gonna pop up. I'm gonna show up to the accessory to all of their crimes. I'm gonna show up as the accessory to their sin or their lack of knowledge. That's what sin means. Their lack of knowledge. They're not standing on their square. I'm always gonna show up as the accessory to them not standing on their square and not being real with themselves. As long as I do that, they're not gonna do what they need to do. So maybe we do need this separation. Hell, some of the shit that I found on the first levels of separation, half of the motherfuckers I was talking to, motherfuckers was like non-playable characters. They were designed for that space. Cousins, family members, friends, whole relationships were non-playable characters. They were side quests. I was meant to go over there and go get a piece of the Triforce, go get this piece of this stone, and then get out of there. I wasn't supposed to stay there. The biggest thing about it, when we think about emotional hoarding, is since you're hoarding all of this old information, and you're using this old information you're using the old information from old relationships to apply to your new relationships. Well, I know I don't want this. How about you talk about what you do want? See, it's the difference. When you're emotionally hoarding, you'll say about, I don't want a man that does this. I don't want a woman that does this. Talk about what you do want. See, it's more engaging and more present to talk about what you do want, because you become what is in alignment with what you do want. I can't say, hey, I want a chick to be nice, fit, and tight in areas, if in my life I'm still hoarding the ideals of I'm doing that based on conquest. If I get the chick with, like, I use one of my other brothers, if I use that same conquest from the relationship of, I'm using high school based relationships, or relationships not based on when you were in high school, but a high school equivalent relationship models. That means, remember when you was in high school, when you was in school, you didn't gain weight. You could eat whatever you wanted. You can fall. You can hurt yourself. You can do whatever you wanted, because guess what? Your grandmother's prayers were over you, because your grandmother actively prayed. Your aunties actively prayed. As much as you were separated away from the church, your grandmother praying was actually a hoodoo and conjuring aspect, or a spiritual aspect. But then your grandma passed away, so nobody kept up with that tradition of praying. So then you wonder why your life went to shit, because you were moving under the guise of protection. So now you went and got some protection crystals and shit, But then everybody talking cash shit about your grandmother or about your mother, or events that happened at that point in time. All these events are coming up because your grandmother prayed over everybody. But now that event that happened to you when you couldn't have that conversation with your mother, that you had the conversation with your grandmother, and your grandmother carried that to the grave for you. She held that for you. Now that she's released from her human narrative, now she's saying, yo, in order for you to get access to where I'm at now, we actually have to deal with this traumatic imprint. We actually got to deal with this information. You have to forgive your uncle for what he did. You got to forgive auntie for what he did. You got to forgive them for what they did. You must forgive them for their human narrative because they're stuck up here. Even though they transitioned and passed on, they're stuck up here. And as long as they're blocking, I can't go forward. You won't go forward. That's what my prayer was for. See, when you're operating in your now state, that's when it changes that. But you got to understand, am I doing it based on survival or well-being? Do I want someone in my life based on survival or well-being? Like, use an example, simple example. Everybody talks about, what time is it? Because I know I got a class at 3, okay. Think about this, simple example. Everybody wants to talk about the tradition. I want the traditional family. I want the traditional family, I want the traditional shit to happen. If I gave you the timeline that in between 1945 and 1950 was the first time the traditional family narrative was introduced. The traditional family narrative that everybody seemed to want was introduced between 1945 and 1950. I always say it was established in 1950, but when I tell people, it's like always go back at least 5 years minimum to the beginning aspects. That means, using an example of, if that concept was established in 1950, look at the time of 1950 and then go back behind 1950. That means go back 5 years. Who was the president? Who was in office? What were the laws like? What was the energy like inside of that space? To create that concept, that is always the most important. Because if you look at the original narratives, for us, our view on family was different. Our view on family, our view on community, our views on family, community, education, how we learn, all of our shit is different. Our traditions are different. So if you're thinking about the traditional sense in this time that's been based since 1950 as an example, you're talking about a trauma-based narrative. A certain amount of energy was collected to create that concept, that psychological symbol. The cause behind it to keep that symbol going had to keep happening. So we think about the 1950s, and then we get into the 1960s, then we get into the civil rights movements. You can see what was taken away in order to keep that energy going in that direction. You can see what kept that energy going in that direction. That's when you're really stuck. You're like, oh shit. Well, the traditional family narrative was homemaker, this, and this, and things of that nature. And then after that, they came in the women's rights and feminism, and this happened, and then this law was passed in the 90s, taking the black man out of the home and things of that nature. And you start looking at these things inside of that space, and you're like, wait, all of this design is taking me away. It's taking us away from something. Because when you really sit inside of that imprint, all of that was designed to take you away from purpose. When you look at a divine masculine and a divine feminine archetype, they understand, or you come into that understanding, that my priority is my purpose, is my first priority. The divine feminine archetype, her first priority is her purpose. Her purpose is established into her well-being. Everything else now goes under that. That dialogue matches that. That means when they come together, when you come together into that unity outside of yourself, You developed a relationship that's not based on how many people do I got to tell my trauma story to before somebody acts right. Nobody's going to act right. You telling everybody your trauma story. They're just going to, since you told your trauma story is based in fear. They're going to emulate what is necessary. They're going to emulate the accessories to match your story. Now you're looking at them, they tell you their story. Now you're going to emulate, even if you learn things, you're going to only emulate based on that fear, the accessories based on their trauma. But if you they start working on theirs and you start working on yours, I almost guarantee. I remember any relationship that I was in, a lot of mom issues, a lot of mother issues with the women. They had mother issues. When I started talking, when I really haven't started, I noticed when I started having a conversation with my mother, unloading and clearing out those hoards of information that I was holding, I noticed that, hey, our relationship changed. We weren't having the same conversations. The sex wasn't the same. The way we was hanging and chilling out wasn't the same. They didn't look familiar to me anymore. The more that I started actively accepting that and becoming assertive in that, I noticed a lot more splits. So then I can see a lot of cycles. You will fall into a cycle, but it's all in how you access it and walk up out of it. It has let you know that that's some work you got to do. When it comes into aspects of emotional hoarding, in closing, in the short aspect, when it comes to this emotional hoarding aspect, you got to let that information go. You got to allow it to come to the surface. You have to assess it. You have to accept that if you do not know how to assess it, I got to get beside somebody that does know how to assess this. And it can't be based on my narrative. I can't, because if I'm using something, I'm going to use insecurity, abandonment, the fear of being alone. That's what it comes to the surface as. So now I'm searching for somebody not to be alone with, to be on my path with me while I'm in this feeling. But you got to remember, the way that you went into that space, you got to continue it. So if you meet somebody because you were lonely, they're going to leave because you weren't lonely. The moment you start feeling unalone, and now all of your underlying shit come out, you clingy because you have codependency issues, you're having an addictive complex, you said that you have a high sex drive, but in reality, you're trying to rationalize the traumatic experience behind how you first learned how to have sex. So your high sex drive, because having a high sex drive means you have a direction with it. Having a high sex drive, for example, means you have a direction with it. In order to have a drive, I must have direction. So if you just say, I like to have sex, why? Because it feels good. If every time you go into relationships, for an example, and you're like, I just want this man to make love to me. I just want her to make me feel good. That's not what they're there for, sir. I don't care how many affirmations you speak over this nigga while you doing it. You're only going to get what is necessary for that space. So you may sit there and have, like, use an example. We don't get into this on Friday on TikTok. You may be sitting there with yourself and you're like, ooh, I want to manifest the knowledge as my resource so I can have abundance in resources. This motherfucker is talking about manifesting a charger or manifesting a house. Ain't nothing wrong with manifesting that space. You want to manifest a house, you got to get your first house. You got to get your energetic house in order. You want to manifest a car, you got to get your energetic drive in order. Everything comes down to when it comes down, what is it coming down to? That's why there's a difference between, you might get excited like your homegirl just got a fucking car. Some dude bought her a car, or your homeboy done found a sugar mama and he done bought her a fucking car. And she making payments on what you didn't realize is that sugar mama or that nigga is making payments on that car. And she got to stay she has a contract with this nigga. Not just the contract with the bank, but she got an energetic contract with this nigga. She got to keep doing what she doing in order for him to keep making them payments. You opened up a contract. If I'm only used to emotional hoarding or holding it to negative, I'm not gonna read contracts. It's like when you sat there and you read your lease for the first time. You know you didn't read the whole damn lease. You flipped through a couple pages, you looked for a couple of things, and then you signed on it. You were just excited to have your own place for the first time. The first time that you signed, I remember the first time that I signed a car dealership paperwork. Sound like you signing your life away when you signing car paperwork. And I remember I didn't read that shit. They didn't even, and the old crazy part is they weren't rushing me to read it. They were like, I could have sat there and read the whole thing. They weren't even rushing me. In my mind, I was like, yo, this white man looking at me while I'm sitting here with this contract and I already gave him this money and I know he's trying to leave. So I'm projecting into the space. That's why I never could keep it. I desire you, 1 second. Doors just open and all random, that's okay. Understanding your process. The main thing for us that we gotta understand. Yeah, you know, that's 96 fucking pages. You know that shit 102 pages. You went to the back page, that said 101, and you like, that's 101 pages of shit I'm not about to read. I'll read it, and you tell yourself, I'm gonna read it when I get home. You never read that shit. This is the problem with staying in the state of that survival state, of that hoarding state. The main basic key to your process is accepting where you are at truly. If you know that, hey, I don't know something, the hardest thing in the aspects of removing yourself from this false image of manhood, womanhood that you carry into your godship, you got to understand that there's steps to come into these processes. You just don't wake up in the morning and be like, I'm a god. There is godship. That means you must go through the process. You got to go through lordship first. You got to go through the priesthood first. You got to go through your priesthood first. You got to go through your lordship first. Because even in this energetic cycle, you may not be meant to be a god in this cycle. But you got to go through the process. You want to be a king. You saying you a king. You got to go through your squirehood first. You got to go through your knighthood first. You got to go through the processes. See that survival narrative to have you looking at, ooh, I'm going to take this status and I'm going to act as this status. And anything that goes against this status, I'm automatically against. But some of the shit that you automatically against may be the very shit that you need in order to embrace and use that status, to use that information, use that energy. Instead of you sitting there, you're supposed to evolve into that space. One of the realest things that I've learned is my humanity is a result of my spiritual presence. If I'm spiritually present, then I can be compassionate in my humanity. If I'm not spiritually present, that's when I noticed I was acting a fucking fool. It was simple reasons that I realized that the only 2 times I went to church, my grandmother had me sitting right beside her with her purse in my lap and her book right there her Bible on my fucking chest, and would not allow me to move. Because my grandmother knew what the fuck I was. Because she did the work to get me. She did the work that conveyed me to be here. Little things like that, you pop up and you look into the space. I remember ever since I'm gonna use this example. I remember the first time all I wanted was a glass of Kool-Aid in my own cup. I was tired of jumping out of sippy cups and bottles. I remember my pops in the backyard burning some leaves, and he made a pile of leaves in the back. He was burning the leaves in the backyard, and I had my wagon. I dumped every baby item I had: bottles, sippy cups, anything that would, in my mind, didn't know at the time, that disdained me as a baby, keep me in baby brain. I went out there, I looked at this man in the face at 1 year old, looked at him, he nodded his head at me, and I just started throwing shit into the fire. Walked into the house, made myself a glass of Kool-Aid, sat down on the couch. My mom came back from the store, was like, where are all the Where are all the little Dionysus? Because my middle name is Dion. Dionysus, that purple rain energy. Where's all of his shit? Burning in the backyard. You burned all this stuff? Nah, he burnt it. My pop's sitting there watching me. All the way until a memory like that and everything that I went through with my pops and forgiving him for his human narrative and letting go of that emotional dead weight helped me understand that there was things that he said along the way, from everything from giving me my fucking spirit, giving me my pops was the, until I became Lucifer, I couldn't embrace that energy because my pops was the first one to call me by my name. My pops was the first one to call me by name. Yes, he did it in human anger. Yes, he was going through his own demons. And yes, he called it through me in anger, but he was the first person to ever call me by my name. Understanding that my grandmother was the first one to call me Samdi and call me the ever present Saturday, because my whole everything from my chart says Saturn and everything in that nature. First person to call me by my name. The first chick that ever called me daddy in fucking bed was the first motherfucker that called me Poppy. But it was the actual real reason I became, because during the drug dealing era, I was Poppy, because my father was Poppy, so I became Poppy. So that became Poppy, but you got to understand where you learned. You had your name all along, you just didn't want to go back and get it. You had all the information all along, you just didn't want to go get it, because you got it hidden behind hordes and repressed memories. But now you want to go, ooh, I'm going to go do some energy work, and I'm going to go unlock this shit. All right, cool, keep unlocking that shit. Without doing the process, without accepting the process. But again, I'm gonna pull some cards while we sitting here. Before I get into, I got my class at 3. I'm about to go make some food and I'm gonna go to the class. This class that I'm doing now is Chakra and Shadow. These are the last 3 classes. It was a 6-week class. No, 3 plus 3. It was a 6-week class. We're in the last 3 weeks. I just reopened up the door for that class, Chakra and Shadow. Everything from the aspects of the human design, understanding this today, for example, we're getting into the emotional authorities. That's this class. I do classes. Every time a class comes to mind, y'all can, if you look on my page, and I'll drop the class and things of that nature. You get in, you don't. The door is still open for that. I desire you to be the fucking best. I desire you to fucking be the best. Right now is the time of the aspects of your works. I'm going to do a nice little collective reading because I just been told to do it. We're looking at works based on your enlightenment. The time process before now, as I talked about it on Sunday, this is a continuance of Sunday when I did Sunday's reading. Sunday and Monday, or the 10-10 energy, or that 10-10 energy. This is a time of contemplation. We're now sitting at that middle of you're sitting at that middle point, quite literally and figuratively, being Wednesday. This is a time to assess your works and assess the things that you're bringing into that state of your state of harvest. Like, you built up to this point, and where you're at is based on what you sowed, the seeds that you've actually sowed. The thing that stops a lot of us a lot of the times when we're looking at that is that a lot of 8s is the aspect of this wishful thinking. A lot of times we'll sow seeds in wishing and hoping, and that is a detrimental act. You'll try to put them seeds in wishing and hoping. So you're hoping for one thing. You're setting your intentions for one thing, but you're hoping for something else. So you're setting your intentions in one space, but you're really hoping for something else. If this happens, then it'll be okay. If that don't happen, I can put that off some more. You're in a space right now where that's no longer able to happen due to that aspect of what you're nurturing. You're cutting yourself down. A lot of times you going into spaces and overall, how many times did you cut yourself out of something because it didn't look the certain way? Oh, it didn't look the way it should have looked. It wasn't here where it was not in the place where I last time found it. It's never going to be in the place where you last time found it. Your work has there's works that you're doing inside of your space that requires a different look at it. Like, for example, if you've been making content, as an example, like for me, I'll use myself as an example, because this is also for me. Me doing my work, like everything from, like, if you ever listen to anything that I ever post, other than certain posts that I might use music that's available on Facebook, most of the shit that I do, like most of the music and the beats and the scores, all of that's the music that I've created from way back. Just create music when I was learning how to put music, put melodies together. So now I'm applying that new mechanic in the aspect of when I'm making my productions and stuff. If you looked at me last year around this same time, I was saying wake the fuck up on every fucking post. Now I've made that an actual logo type aspect or an actual sigil of wake the fuck up. I created a wake the fuck up sigil. And now I put wake the fuck up on everything. So if you look at any of my opening, like any video that I'm doing now, it's going to have wake the fuck up. And now I'm doing different edits, like the doors opening, the doors closing. I'm deeper inside of that aspect because now I'm increasing my quality. Because my whole biggest thing in my beginning was the aspect of, like most of us would be like, I don't have the money to do that. But I didn't realize how much shit was free. There's 95 apps on your phone right now that are motherfucking free for video editing. I don't know how to video edit. Then sit down with one of the apps. Of course your first video edit gonna look like shit or not look the best. It might look the motherfucking best, but it might not get a certain response. But you're not doing it for that reason. That's the aspect of when you're making your decisions. You're making decisions based on progress and not based on status. You've already cemented yourself in your purpose. Your purpose is going to take on multiple forms. Your purpose is going to take on multiple forms, and that's in the key of the aspects. That's what you're coming into, that key of opportunity, that Ace of Pentacles or that Ace of Coins. That's where your opportunity lies. Your shit is going to take your purpose. As long as you're sitting in your purpose, as long as you are delivering inside of your edge, your status is going to take multiple turns. You might one week you might be the best ever I might be the best ever when it comes to breaking down things and simplifying things and being the unorthodox therapist that I am. I am the best at that. I know that I am because I can see my results. But that's in my purpose. Now it's time for me to design. I have the opportunity to design in the aspects of collaborations, working with other people, extending myself into that space, working with other people, creating other things. I know this example because I've made the decisions, or you're making decisions that are based on that expansion. If you look at my page and you look down at some of my pages, or you go to my website, for example, mine is going to the store because I've locked down the store. But if you look on my page and you go to the bottom and you look, it says a Code Academy. That's my teaching imprint that I'm creating. That shit came to me. I was like, oh, a Code Academy. That's the teaching imprint, the schooling imprint. That's the retreats. That's all of that aspect. But that's also the aspects of when I'm working on the books, working on ebooks, working on workbooks and information of that nature. I planted that. Now when I go back and I look at it, it's like, okay, cool. Let me look at this. Now this is an opportunity where I have nothing going, like me getting out of the fear of you saying you have nothing going on. Let me go look back at something that I wrote 3 months ago. Similar to the same thing of me looking back at old treatments before I made them podcasts and made them lives. You always have the opportunity to take your information that you created, taking that information and bringing it forward. It may not work back then because you weren't the person that was necessary for it. I damn sure wasn't the motherfucker that was ready to speak to people. because I was so scared of cursing and sounding a certain way. I had to sound all proper. But then after my era of my time of listening to Bobby Hemming, that nigga cursed every other second. Master teacher cursed every other second, and listening to Baba Dick Gregory didn't give a shit about your fucking feelings. I was like, maybe that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Maybe it is my tone that's needed. So I had to develop that tone. The key to that aspect is what brings you to the end of that process. You set your tone. Have you set your tone? Are you living in the disciplines of your intentions? Are you, instead of always having this, it's cool that you speak in the affirmations all the time, but are you living the affirmations? It's one thing for me to say that I am gratitude, and another thing for me to be living in the aspects of being gratitude in all the multiple ways. That means if I walk down the street and I see somebody sitting on the corner and I know I went for a run and I got 2 water bottles of water in my hand, and I see somebody over there, they look like they're thirsty, and I get that nudge, I'm going to give them my bottle of water. Because I'm always in a state of gratitude. I'm always in that state of abundance. That's how you get, this is how you get that recall of that pay. This is how that shit keeps flowing to you. Stop shutting yourself off. It's time to stop that hoarding process. You've been sitting here hoarding for the last couple of weeks. You know what? I don't want to do that because that means I got to take time away from this. Maybe it might be time for you to take time away from that. You'll get it a couple of times where you're sitting there thinking about, like, I don't want to take time away from this because it's going to take time away from this. And then you'll be forced to take time away from it. All because you weren't listening to yourself. You told yourself you needed time. You got the position. You told yourself you needed time. I need that new position. You told yourself what you wanted new, and it was presented to you. But yeah, that was the collective. I appreciate y'all for stomping through. Appreciate y'all for stopping through. I'm about to go in here and I'm about to go take my shoes back off and go stand in this grass. Get everything situated. Go let my students know that we about to start the Zoom classes. The Zoom classes at 3. Go for another 3 to 4 hours. Go for this next 3 hours on that. Hit my self-inventory. And continue being the fucking best. I desire one thing and one thing only. My desire is for you to be the fucking best. My desire is in the aspects of my purpose being taking this information that we weren't privy to or we didn't understand in the way that it was presented to us, and actually giving us the understanding of why it's presented to us a lot of times. Everything from the aspects of therapy. Black people are foreign to fucking therapy. I don't want to go sit down and talk to no fucking body. Because it's not talking to anybody. I used to feel the same way about therapy until I became I felt that same way, and I went to school for this. I went to school for psychology. Literally. And didn't use it up until the last 7 years. That's your process. You've always had all the information. You've always been in that right space. But it's up to you to release yourself from hoarding and letting go and, oh my God, but if I let this go, then it's going to happen again. Here's the thing. As long as you think that way, it's going to happen again. Until you understand what the fuck it is. Change is inevitable. But you accepting that change is on my 3 favorite lines. Healing is destructive. You are deserving, but you are not entitled. And your honesty is based in comprehending the need for transparency and the necessity to embracing vulnerability. You cannot plant shit on the fucking concrete. You can throw seeds on the concrete all day, but they're not going to fucking grow. Gotta step into that vulnerability. Y'all stay tuned for more information for Fridays live. We're going live on Friday on TikTok. Shadow sessions. We're going to get on live on TikTok. Get deeper into some relationships type shit like that. Just to round it out because it's the day of love. Don't wait until Friday though. You know, everything from readings, consultations, all of my services. Hit the website. Link is above. Link is above. Hit the website. Hit me in the inbox. Start the dialogue. Until you start the dialogue, you ain't going to evolve. I love you. We love us. Ashe.